Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB.
And I'm Natasha Williams, LPB news anchor. Well, voters have spoken after a year of campaigning, intra-party attacks, a television ad challenged in court, and 3 visits to the state by President Donald Trump. The 2019 race for Louisiana's next governor has ended. Governor John Bel Edwards has won re-election by a 51 to 49% victory.
And LPB has been there throughout the entire process, partnering with the Council for a Better Louisiana for one of the first live debates and hosting the only runoff debate. This evening, LPB joins with the LSU Manship School of Mass Communications to take a look back at the elections for governor and the legislature.
We'll hear insiders from each of the 3 gubernatorial campaigns discussing strategy and what the outcome might mean for the 2020 presidential election. We'll also hear from political pundits and lawmakers about the implications of the large turnover at the state capitol. So sit back and enjoy the next hour as we take an election reflection 2019. Well, welcome to our guests and welcome to our audience. We're looking forward to having a great conversation, hearing firsthand about what went on behind the scenes of the top 3 gubernatorial campaigns. Let's meet our panel. Richard Carbo served as campaign manager for the John Bel Edwards for Louisiana, Governor Edwards' election team. Jared Arsenault was the media consultant for the John Bel Edwards team. Brian Reed was the campaign manager for Eddie Rispone as for governor. And Luke Letlow, Chief of Staff for U.S. Representative Ralph Abraham. Lionel Rainey was consultant for the Ralph Abraham for Governor campaign. Let's start from the very beginning. When you decided to be affiliated with your particular candidate, could you tell us what were the top issues that you were concerned about? Starting with you, Mr. Carpo.
You know, I came on with Governor Edwards back in 2015 for the runoff and had the privilege of serving in his administration. So I've kind of seen firsthand for the last 4 years kind of the battles he had and saw everything that he was able to accomplish over the last 4 years. So I just knew that that I knew his background, which I think a lot of people around the state really admired him for, and I just knew I wanted to be a part of his campaign. I mean, he has a strong record of accomplishment that we were going to be able to tell a really good story, and just wanted to be a part of that.
Kind of second what Richard said. I handled the governor's media in 2015, and for me it was continue to tell his personal story. The partisan leanings of the state. It was important to, as a Democrat, to continue to establish what had led him to have such strong favorability ratings and approval ratings over the last 4 years, and then also to really kind of try to frame the election as much as possible as are we better off today than we were 4 years ago through that lens.
Okay. Brian?
Well, I come at it from a little bit different perspective. I'm not from Louisiana, so my reasons are going to be a little bit different than these guys. But I had an opportunity to meet Eddie. My first interview with him was 3 hours long. And I decided to take the position because it was just very clear that Eddie is a really, really wonderful person. He is a very, very super guy. Very down to earth, in it for the right reasons, and I was drawn to that. I thought that it would be a very fun campaign to run, having a candidate who was so wonderful. I was also very impressed with his approach to the race. He was very inquisitive. He asked a lot of questions. I've always thought the best candidates are the ones that ask the most questions, who are the most inquisitive, who build a team around them who they think is smarter than them on these different things. And if they trust your thought process and your judgment, then they will trust the outcome. And so I was just drawn to him as a person and his approach to the campaign, and I thought it would be a wonderful experience, which it was.
Luke?
Sure. So I would say, I've been with Ralph Abraham since 2014 when he first ran for Congress. He's a guy that's accomplished a lot of things. He's a doctor, a veterinarian, a veteran, farmer. And so just a guy that had lived a lot of life experiences, had a lot of accomplishments. Having worked in state government, I saw certainly a candidate that had a lot to offer. Just, I've watched him in Congress. I sort of watched him as he grew in that process. And I sort of saw a natural executive ability that I thought would make him an exceptional governor. In terms of where we represent in Congress, we are 24 parishes, 24 of the poorest parishes in the state. So certainly we've seen numerous challenges. We've seen, jobs leave. We saw just a need, in our opinion, to go in a different direction. And so while a lot of folks honestly weren't willing to step up on the conservative side, a lot of folks were very intimidated by Governor Edwards, ultimately for good reasons, obviously, but Congressman Abraham was not afraid to step up in that regard. So,
okay. Lionel?
When I first got the call to potentially run Congressman Abraham's race, I knew who he was. I had certainly heard of him, but I didn't know anything about him. And the first thing I thought was, well, there's absolutely no way that he can even compete, right? He's a guy from a part of the state that has zero population base, very small population. He's got no name ID. He doesn't have any money in the bank. There's just no way that he can be competitive. And a good friend said, well, you just need to go sit down and meet him. And I drove up to Alto, Louisiana, which I'd never heard of. It took a long time to get there because your GPS will not take you to his house. And I sat down and met with him, and I absolutely fell in love with him. He's one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life, and he would have been a fantastic executive for this state. And I couldn't be more proud to have run his race.
When you talk about the fact that you did not know who he was, you didn't know about his, he had no ID, as you said, was that one of the major issues that the campaign had in getting his word out, getting his message out?
It was an issue, for sure. And, money certainly plays a role when it comes to elections. You have to be able to introduce your candidate to the public. But we had a really, really good plan. We didn't have a big team, but we had a really smart team. And we treated this race like you would treat a high school election in school. We went lunch table to lunch table across the state, starting in January, actually in December. We built out a plan and said, look, we're going to start in the northeast corner of the state where he is known. Then we're going to move over into the Shreveport area, which is very similar to that. Then we're going to move down into Acadiana, and we're going to go down from there into southwest Louisiana and over into Jefferson Parish, and then and New Orleans, and then back up into Baton Rouge. And we literally did that. We went district to district, introducing him, utilizing earned media, utilizing social media, because we didn't have any money, and slowly but surely built his name ID. And as people met Ralph Abraham, they fell in love with Ralph Abraham, which is why we were able to compete at the level we did, spending probably 15% of the amount of money on TV that the other campaign spent.
With more money, do you think you could have?
There's no question. We weren't able to go up on broadcast TV in Baton Rouge. So there's a lesson to be learned. You have to have enough money to be able to be on every broadcast network in the state. We met our vote goals, or other candidates missed vote goals in every other broadcast region than Baton Rouge. We absolutely lost this race in East Baton Rouge, West Feliciana, Ascension, and Livingston. We were upside down in our vote totals, and that's where we could not respond to the negative advertising, and that's inevitably why we lost this race. We led the race up until 3 weeks, and then it was inevitably a good play on the Risponi campaign's part. But if you don't have the ability to respond when people go that hard against you, you're not gonna be able to be successful. So we'll definitely
get into that. But let's talk about the money spent. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Mr. Risponi, and the money that he spent.
We knew that, coming into this, we were going to have the money necessary to compete. But the reality is we spent a lot of money, and Eddie invested a lot of money into this. But ultimately, the reason why we weren't successful is really because of how strong of a challenger or an opponent John Bel Edwards was. When we started this race, the political environment was not good. John Bel Edwards' approval rating was 60%. Over 30% of Republicans approved of his job performance. Over 40% of conservatives approved of his job performance. Our first survey had him at 49%, so very close to that 50% to avoid a runoff. And so we made the decision early on that we were never going to convince people. We could not allow this to be a job performance race. If it was a job performance race on John Bel Edwards, we were going to lose. They approved of his job performance on the economy and education and all these sorts of things. And so our pathway to victory was making this an ideological choice. It needed for us to be a conservative versus a liberal, a outsider versus a career politician, a businessman versus a trial lawyer. And so we were ultimately unsuccessful. We spent a lot of money, and I think the reason why we were unable to be successful on Election Day is just John Bel Edwards is enormously popular, and he is a strong opponent.
He's enormously popular, but is he really a liberal? I mean, was that part of the issue that you had, that he basically
on certain issues, he's certainly, I think, left-leaning, and he's a liberal. I understand he is pro-life. Does support the Second Amendment.
Pro-gun.
But on issues, taxes and spending.
Signed the biggest abortion restrictions.
On issues, taxes and spending, the economy, you can say that he's a liberal. I think that's a fair critique.
Let's just talk about strategy. So what do you feel was the most effective strategy for your candidate's campaign? Obviously a successful one. So what do you feel was the most effective? Staying on message? Was it?
I think we were very disciplined. I mean, I think we knew what our message was going to be going into this campaign. I think, it's very difficult. The governor was being attacked starting, I think, July 9th, and it was sustained the entire time. And with the president coming down 3 times, I think it's very easy for a campaign to get off message. But we had our polling, and we knew what the story that we wanted to tell, and we kind of, it was very hard. A lot of our staff is here right now, and they can tell you it was just very difficult with all of that going on around you. I think there were four different outside groups that were on us at one time attacking the governor, but we stayed very consistent. I mean, our polling throughout the race was very static. We didn't see a lot of movement. I think the label, as we were just talking about, of calling him a radical liberal just doesn't stick for John Bel Edwards, and we made sure that we stayed focused on what we were trying to do towards everything. I don't know if you disagree on it.
No, I think absolutely right. And I think Brian alluded to it was difficult to take somebody as popular as him and try to make people dislike him, and really, the liberal label is a harder sell with a guy like him. And one of the things that I think we knowing that would be a strategy coming at us, at least from the media side and the commercials that we were putting out, I thought it was important to try to take those personal biographical touch points in his life and incorporate that as much as possible into the messaging. Like, for example, we knew that there was going to be some type of criminal justice reform hit about he's letting criminals loose and dangerous people into your neighborhoods and all that kind of thing. And so one of the first ads that we ran was him talking about his family, 4 sheriffs in his lineage, a brother who's a police chief, and then also, obviously you don't go to West Point and serve as an Army Ranger if you're not interested in protecting people. And this guy's entire who he is and his family history and his personal history flies in the face of any idea that this guy would be soft on crime or a danger to your family.
And we talk about strategy. Let's go back to the Risponi teams.
We could not run a job performance race on John Bel Edwards. We were not going to convince people that their opinion of him was wrong. We needed to make the race about an ideological choice. A conservative versus an outsider, a career politician versus a businessman. That's the race that we needed to run in order to win. Ultimately, we were unsuccessful. They were running a different race, talking about different issues, and they were talking about poll-tested issues that worked for them. They were running the right message for their campaign. It was ultimately successful. Elections are about choices and contrasts. If we were to say that John Bel Edwards is bad on the economy for X, Y, and Z, he's bad on education for X, Y, and Z, bad on healthcare for X, Y, and Z, well, the voters didn't believe that. But what the voters did believe is they were conservative. The voters were pro-Trump. the voters wanted a conservative outsider. So we had to fight on different terrain than them, and they had to fight on, they were running a separate race, which ultimately was successful.
What about your candidate's decision to attack Mr. Abraham's folks, basically more so than you did the governor in the primary?
What we noticed early on is I didn't think that Abraham was going to be as strong as he was. When we went in and we did negative message testing on Abraham, there were 5-6 hits that were 60%, voters were 60% less likely to support him if they heard those things. But what happened, and was really befuddling, honestly, when we got towards September and after about 6 weeks of advertising, Abraham's image was incredibly strong for reasons I would be interested in hearing. And so there really was not a path to victory unless we went negative. Lionel mentioned if they had more money, they would have won. I think that he's right. And so that was something that we had to do in order to be successful. If you looked at the polling in August and early September before the negative advertising, people liked Eddie and they liked our message, but they just liked Abraham better. The intensity of our voters was not that great. Our very favorable number was very low, like 10% or so. So we just weren't getting the same intensity. An interesting stat that we found in the verbatims of our survey, people thought that Eddie was the conservative outsider. But of those who thought that, they were voting for Abraham. People believed that Eddie was the job creator, but of those who believed that, they were voting for Abraham. People thought that Eddie was the biggest Trump supporter, but of those who thought that, they were voting for Abraham. So there was a serious disconnect with some of our message and its translation to the ballot. And the reason is because the voters just liked Abraham better than Eddie at that time. So going negative was the only path to victory for us.
Let's talk to the Abraham camp about the negative ads. And I just, in doing some research, was going back looking at some of the YouTubes where basically Mr. Abraham came out and said, "That's not true. That's not true." And pretty much it was, "That's not true. That's not true. We did give our money to charity." So, I mean, what is your response to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll speak to the charity part. That entire issue, honestly, I did not see having a huge impact on the campaign. Obviously, the Gumbo PAC ran that ad first. I mean, the reality is the congressman gave 2 years of his salary to St. Jude's, continued to give tons of money to that charity and others. The mistake, I think, on our end, was he being such a good man to actually say at some point, we did not continue to be able to fulfill that. Sheer honesty, just by coming out and saying that. So I don't actually think that attack was the death blow. I honestly believe that the bogus attacks on the Pelosi support, and I think the bogus attacks on the president from the Responding campaign were the death blow for us.
But in the end, it seemed that maybe Mr. Respondi's folks didn't pick up on all the voters that basically supported your candidate. Do you think it was an allegiance to your candidate?
One of the things I noticed is, obviously, I thought that the allegiance to Trump, that's an important thing. Certainly, this is a red state. But what I knew is the 5th District of Louisiana is by far Trump country, if there's ever a part of the state that's Trump country. So for Eddie to come out and try to emulate and take the Trump vote, which was our base, which was our constituency, first and foremost. At one point I saw a poll with 70% approval rating of Donald Trump in the 5th District. That alone was part of the problem. Literally his, target base was our family in our district. So I would point to that as one issue.
Let's go to some other things. What would you do differently? Let's go down the line. What would you do differently in the campaign?
Well, we won by 40,000 votes, so I'd be afraid anything we might do differently might screw that up. I've been in campaigns we won by 9 votes and where we lost by 33. And when you win by 9, you thank God you did everything you did. And when you lose by 33, you wish you'd have done everything different. So, I'm proud of the race that we ran. I think that, our candidate worked extremely hard. I think our team worked extremely hard. From a messaging perspective, I think that we stayed on message and kind of hit the points.
Looking back on it, we probably could have seen some signs with the turnout or lack of energy for the October 12th primary and played that up a little bit more. People were just sleeping on the race, I think. I mean, it wasn't getting a lot of attention other than, you know, the maybe a little bit of the fighting going on between the campaigns, but folks just weren't paying attention to it. And I think that a lot of people around the state, the governor is very popular, and I think a lot of our supporters probably just thought that he was just gonna, not knowing the information, would have just coasted to re-election and just kind of were asleep on it. And
maybe not taking into account all the money that was being spent.
Yeah, something like.
Well, and I think Richard, I mean, that not identifying sort of some complacency in our base. And I think part of it had to do with, the two other campaigns are kind of fighting out sort of a Republican primary, and the people who really, really like Governor Edwards obviously are, turned off by that, and in their minds, well, surely, they're not going to elect either of those guys because they don't like the message. That doesn't mean other people don't like the message, right? And so, I mean, I know the day after the election, I started getting phone calls from people, especially in New Orleans, like, okay, what can we do? We got to get involved. Whereas none of them were calling in the primary. And I mean, I was even hearing from Republican friends saying, oh, well, your guy's going to win in the first, that kind of thing. And so I think that was something that, something we could have identified earlier.
Change in energy right after October 12th, at least on our side.
Urgency and some of that I don't know that you can control. I think some things in politics, momentum, it comes from a place that you can't just throw money on television at it. You can't just throw money on the street at it. Everybody's got families and other things, going on in their lives. So they're not living and dying by this stuff like we are. So
I think in the runoff, maybe there's some things I would have done differently, but I don't think it would have affected the result. On election day, our exit poll had John Bel Edwards' approval rating of 56%. So in the runoff, would we do things a little different? Maybe, but I don't think it would have affected the outcome. I would say in the jungle primary, I would have done things different. I think that in the beginning, we were internally going back and forth between going up early on television and going up later. And we went back and forth on it for months and months and months and months. And I think it made our campaign sloppy. In some of our messaging and decision making and just the mechanics of the campaign. We ultimately decided to go up late, which I think was the right decision in retrospect. But I thought that in the jungle primary, we were unable to really consolidate support among activists, elected officials, various insider groups, because I just think that our campaign was a little mechanically sloppy at that time.
Okay. How about the Abraham team?
We looked at this 100 different ways, right? I mean, you go at spending $1.85 million on television, and which would have been the smallest amount spent in modern history to get a governor into a runoff and to win an election. And you look at the decisions. We looked at the decisions that we've made. Inevitably, if you have a campaign that you're running against that is willing to say things that are blatantly false, fundamentally untrue about a candidate, and they have unlimited funds to do that, I don't know what you can do to get past that. I don't think this is a referendum on, or don't think this means that you can have money and be able to win a campaign. But if you have unlimited funds or a significant amount of funds, and you're running against a candidate that has a very limited amount of funds and are willing to say things like the things that were said, I really don't know what else we can do, or what else we could have done. If we would have had, again, I go back to, if I know that if we would have had the money to be able to be on broadcast television in the Baton Rouge metro region, we would have been in the runoff, because everywhere else we were able to respond on television, we got right, or very close to our vote goals. And except for the Baton Rouge metro, which we were upside down in a big way. And again, I mean, as a strategy for the other campaign, it was clearly the right strategy for them to take. In regards to, was that the right strategy for the state of Louisiana? I think it was a very short game. I think you played a short game to get into the runoff, and it inevitably cost you the race because you didn't take into account the hundreds of thousands of people that still voted for and genuinely love someone that then could not go to the polls and vote for.
Even if the candidate asked.
right? Even if the candidate asks, which he did about 5. One of the most impressive, I saw a lot of impressive things from Ralph Abraham this year, a lot. Man, he would have been a great executive. But I think maybe the most impressive thing I saw was when he walked into his room with his family and told him that we weren't going to get there. Clearly, everybody was upset. And we had the conversation of, you're going to go up and give the speech. He called Eddie and conceded. And I asked him, Luke and I were both there. I was like, do you want to go up there and endorse after what a bitter primary? And he said, I gave my word that I would. And that was it. Just he's an impressive guy. I've never seen that before.
Okay. Let's talk about the national attention the race received. We're going to talk to the Edwards campaign about this. The national attention the race received, did it affect your strategy? How did you go about handling 3 visits by the commander-in-chief, basically beating you down for hours at a time on the stage at those rallies?
I think we realized pretty early on that, at the end of the day, there's no competing with the leader of the free world when he comes and campaigns against you. So there's only so much you can do.
But you went to the same towns
we
he
did. And I think our strategy became continue telling the story that we've been telling all along, making sure that we got the equal time that the governor deserved to be in the area to talk about his accomplishments. I mean, we knew that we weren't going to try and have a competing rally. We weren't going to try and draw these huge crowds because it wasn't going to work, but we could still tell our story. And we made a very conscious effort, and the governor made a very conscious effort not to make this a race about him and President Trump. This was a race about him and about Louisiana, and I think our team did a great job of making that happen. I mean, I think if you looked at the coverage, because locally there were no stations that carried it live. They were sometimes at odd times and in strange parts of the state that we probably would have thought they would have gone somewhere else. But the coverage was the governor doing his thing and the president and the other campaigns doing theirs. And I think ultimately we did a really good job.
And I'd say, you mentioned coming down and 3 hours at a time, whatever. I would say too, at least to my pleasure and probably to, I would think, the Rispone campaign's frustration, it wasn't a 2.5 hour rally about the campaign. I mean, the president spent maybe 5 minutes, 3 minutes of his shtick, on this race. And so that was one thing. The first tweet that he sent out, I remember I texted Eric Hull, our communications director, and told him, because the first tweet was, Louisiana's got a radical liberals. I mean, I don't know how many adjectives were in front of John Bel Edwards' name, but a bunch of stuff. And I told him, I said, I think it's a mistake. He's making it way too political. Like y'all said, people don't believe that about Governor Edwards. And so I think that was probably a fundamental mistake. Not to say that you had anywhere else to go, but I think that it was a mistake to think you were going to make people dislike Governor Edwards. You were going to convince people that he's something that they don't believe that he already is. I think that had the president come out and said, and maybe just in general, the criticism been more from the perspective of, he's a nice man, I respect that he served this country, but he's a bad governor, and then you could, make the criticisms of his time in office. I think that might have been a little bit more effective, but from the jump, the president came right in, and it was just this litany of things that I think were really a hard sell. I mean, there were some very strong supporters of the Second Amendment who, distribute firearms around this country, who stepped up and said, Mr. President, whoever's telling you that he's a threat to the Second Amendment is lying to you. And a picture, I think the headline of it was, I sold John Bel Edwards his first shotgun to his dad when he was 9 years old. And this is a guy who hunts and fishes and is an outdoorsman and that kind of thing. So I was really kind of surprised that the president went so hard on the Second Amendment. I mean, I get who he's trying to talk to with that, but I also think that it's might have been a bridge too far for people to completely buy into.
Okay, let's talk about the campaign strategy differing from different parts of the state. The northern part of the state, the message, the southern part, did you take different avenues? The central part of the state, did you go a different way? We could start maybe with Abraham. I know you mentioned that you went heavy on TV ads in the northern part of the state, but not here. Did you do things differently overall, though?
Oh, without question. I mean, if you go to different parts of the city, and you'll find people with different needs and different perspectives. Go to different parts of a region. Certainly, if you go to different parts of the state, people that live in Calcasieu Parish and people that live in Richland Parish are different and have different. Different, not necessarily belief systems, but that there are absolutely different messages based around one core message. But what we did, which I think was really effective, was go in and talk about things that matter to people, right? So I fundamentally do not believe that you can win a campaign by running a campaign saying don't vote for that guy because he's bad. I think I fundamentally believe to win campaigns you have to say you need to vote for my guy because he's great. And what we did was we went with Congressman Abraham literally into district and parish and talked about things that affected those people. So we would, for example, look at capital outlay, right? Find a capital outlay project that the governor had vetoed, and maybe that area had flooded and that had been affected. So we would go in and talk to those people about those specific things that affected people's lives. We tried to make it more of a local campaign than a national campaign because we knew that, just trying to paint him as a liberal clearly doesn't work. But we also knew that there are core fundamentals of policies within his campaign which people do not agree with. We are losing jobs. Our economy is not great. And so we went in, and it's always about the economy. And we went in to talk to people and said, this is what Ralph Abraham wants to do that will make your life better. Not this is how bad this guy is. So our core message was the same, but it was tailored to each individual or each specific part of the state, which worked. Didn't inevitably work, but it worked. For a significant amount of time.
I'll just add to that too. Jay Darden gives the brilliant presentation. Louisiana ain't Mississippi, and he's so right when he talks about how we are at least 3 different states, and so that's a challenge. We've never had a North Louisiana Republican who was sort of the at the top of the ticket running statewide for governor. So this was a test. This was a giant test. One of the things that irritated me and continues to irritate me is the idea that no one from North Louisiana can ever be governor, or no Republican, and that comes from our own neck of the woods more than anywhere. I mean, people back home say, there's not enough of us. The reality is, the state is 3 different places, but we did apply, I think, different strategies in different areas of the state. You talked about enthusiasm. I noticed incredible parts of the state that had zero enthusiasm about this race. Other parts of the state were on fire. Acadiana, Lafayette, I found incredibly open to our campaign. They were hurting with the oil and gas industry, certainly jobs, leaving that area. But in Lake Charles, where you had a boom, the exact opposite happened. So you start to run an ad in Lake Charles and Lafayette, you almost needed 2 different ads there. It was just 2 different issues. So lots of geography, I think, important in any governor's race.
I really have enjoyed the conversation with you gentlemen, and I think it gave us a good insight as to some of the things you were dealing with and the approaches you took. So let's start with some questions.
I know y'all did a lot of polling, and most of us will see just the bottom line, 52 to 49 or whatever. But can you talk about your crosstabs and your 3 ways and how you analyze male, female, age groups, income, education, in shaping your message?
We did an enormous amount of polling this race. We were an entirely data-driven campaign. We were, while we were on television, we were polling 4 and 5 times a week, in addition to doing various paid phone efforts through universes that we were trying to collect IDs from. I would say the one thing personally that I've gained from this race is the importance of not only doing your weekly brush fire surveys or your benchmark surveys, but also your tracking surveys. It's important to test what you are doing, but I also think it's important to test the tester and hold the tester accountable. And it's also important to know where you're going and know where you're flying this plane. And so that was enormously important. And one example I could give is, when we decided to go negative on Abraham, we were at 20%, Ralph was at 22, and after about 5 to 7 days, we were at 22 and he was at 16. And we also asked what we were concerned about was the repercussions we were going to have on, if folks were angry at Eddie for the negative advertising. The poll came back, 9% thought that Abraham was running a negative campaign, 11% Eddie Rispone was running a negative campaign, 16% said both, I think 30% said neither, and 34% unsure. And so that gave us a good perspective that what we were doing was not having a negative impact on Eddie's image or the ballot. And we could continue that negative advertising on Ralph and not have it have negative implications. What it also did is we said, okay, it's not going to take this much to keep this guy down and into third place. So let's lessen the negative information flow on Abraham and increase the positive information flow on Eddie, maybe add some more negative information flow to John Bel Edwards. So constantly polling and looking at the data is so enormously important in these big, expensive races where you're spending so much money on paid advertising.
Do you think that the outcome of this election actually plays into the 2020 presidential election?
I think every campaign is its own unique campaign. We've all run enough campaigns to know nothing from one can be applied to the next one as gospel. I think, people on the left will try to say this shows weakness, on the president's part. People on the right will say, no, it, has nothing to do with it. I think ultimately the presidential race is going to play out based on who the Democrats elect and, what the campaigns do.
I think one important thing to recognize from this campaign to take to the presidentials is these races have become enormously partisan. And the amount of people in the middle is shrinking, and it's becoming a turnout battle. After the jungle primary, we thought that we were going to be down by 10 points. But because Abraham had graciously endorsed us and Trump had kind of came in and given his blessing, the race was immediately reset, and we were only down about 3 to 5 points. And it was just very, 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 very partisan. And it was really immovable for the entire race. One of the things that we did tactically that I thought were actually two things. Tactically that was really big was we used 15-second spots because you don't need an audible disclaimer in Louisiana for your ads. And so we could get 15-second messages and increase our spot count. And in addition to that, what we did is we asked Eddie to put in $500,000 on a Thursday or Friday. So we would do a media buy on a Friday, which they couldn't add to and respond to on a Friday. Can't do buys on Saturday, Sunday, responding to it on Monday. So you got Tuesday, you're putting your ads up. So there was a period of time where we were outspending them, out advertising them by an enormous amount. Mm-hmm. And then we go back in the field and we see these tracking surveys, and it did not that much. It was still 48, 46. His liberal rating moved throughout the race in our favor, but it was just a partisan, immovable race. And it was just a turnout battle that they won, did a great job at. And I think that's something to look at headed into 2020 is I think these races are just turnout battles.
Was the turnout battle amplified because of the president's visit both ways? So
we did a survey Wednesday, Thursday, a forced ballot that had the race 50.8 us, 49.2. So we were up by 1.6%. And then we did a exit poll that had us down 51 to 49, had us losing on election day, so it flipped. And so I think the reality is there is no greater mobilizer for Republicans than President Trump. And conversely, there is no greater mobilizer for Democrats than President Trump. And so you take that good with the bad. I think it was a combination of Donald Trump mobilizing both sides. And also, I think, their team doing a very, very good job at GOTV. I don't know what exactly they did. I can just see from the results that what they did was very effective.
And I'll take on the 15-second ads that he talked about. I know, at least on our side, psychologically, it created just this idea that there was a barrage that Eddie, because some of them were 15-second ads. You guys were bookending, and so the commercial break starts with one and it ends with one, and so Thank you for that, because then I start getting phone calls saying, well, then why don't we do 15-second ads? And because all they have to show is Donald Trump saying John Bell's a liberal, vote for Eddie. I mean, that was, you can do that in 15 seconds. We're trying to tell a story about healthcare. We're trying to tell a story about education, or, whatever it may be. Or in North Louisiana, Monroe and Alexandria, we're trying to remind the Abraham voters up there that about the Risponi attacks. And, I think Lionel mentioned the Nancy Pelosi hits. I mean, it was very intentional that when we were showing the setup to the congressman, in the debates saying, you're lying about me, my family, this and that, that one of the shots we set up with was the Ralph Abraham and Nancy Pelosi up there together, because at least sitting where we were sitting, it was, all right, that nobody really believes that Congressman Abraham is a Nancy Pelosi supporter. And so, we didn't have any polling or data on it, but that's just one of those you kind of go with your gut and say, if I'm an Abraham supporter and I really like the guy, that's what I'm probably the most upset about, is linking him to, but also for the Risponi campaign, it may have been what pulled the most kind of soft Abraham supporters off of him.
That was what worked the best, was the Nancy Pelosi hit. So when we did negative message testing in September, all of a sudden Abraham just had this really strong image and this suit of armor, and was really hard to take him down. And so that's why instead of running an ad on one issue, we just threw a litany of things. And then the next week we viewed the verbatims of the survey, and what popped the most in the verbatims was the Pelosi hit. And then that was more of the focus on the negative information flow moving forward, because the Pelosi hit was the best hit against Congressman Abraham.
Greatly appreciate all of you participating, and I'm sure our audience, give them a round of applause. They were awesome. Great discussion. Thank you so much.
Welcome again, everyone. I'm Melinda Delott, correspondent with the Associated Press. This panel is the future of the Louisiana legislature, and it'll take a look at what surprises arose from the October and November elections and how that will impact the upcoming legislative session with the re-elected Democratic governor. Before we begin, let's meet our panelists. Senator John Alario is the state senator for Senate District 8. And finishing his third consecutive term, he's the only legislator in Louisiana to serve multiple terms as Speaker of the House and President of the Senate. Mr. Jeremy Alford is the publisher of La Politics Weekly and co-author of Long Shot, which recounts the 2015 gubernatorial elections. Representative Pat Smith is the state representative for House District 67, most recently ran for the District 14 Senate seat. Ms. Liz Mangum is the managing partner and founding member of Southern Strategy Group. She represents clients before the legislative, executive, and regulatory branches of state government. And Representative Barry Ivey serves as the representative for House District 65. He was first elected to the House in March 2013 and was just reelected to another term in the October election. I don't even think he had an opponent, so reelected without opposition. Thank you all again for being here. The legislature in the upcoming term is going to be clearly more conservative, particularly in the Senate. And so what do you think that will mean for Governor Edwards' working relationship with the chambers and his ability to get an agenda accomplished? Do you think that they will be willing to work with him, or do you think that there will be more gridlock than there had been in the past 4 years? And I guess I'll start with you.
Well, the numbers have changed. There's a couple of more Republican seats in the Senate than was there before. I think there are reasonable people in the Senate who are going to work with the governor. The governor has reached out in the past in his last 4 years of crossing party lines, of opening the door and talking with them and trying to work out the compromise. The whole secret to democracy is listen to the other guy. If you listen to him, maybe he's got a good idea. And if he listens to you for a while, you've got a good idea. You put both of those together, then democracy works. I think Governor Edwards is open to that. And what I see the makeup of the Senate at this point, there are 10 new members of the Senate who have not served there before, have not served in the legislature before, so their track record is not shown at this point. It remains to be seen. But of all of those that I know that are there, I think they're all reasonable people who would sit to do what's best for the common good of the state.
But I will say on that subject, some of the people who were part of the conservative House Republican bloc that helped sort of argue against Governor Edwards' agenda in the House have now moved to the Senate. So So it does seem that some of the people who are going over there have a track record of not necessarily being willing to compromise or just philosophically disagreeing with the agenda that the governor has.
You have quite a few number of people coming over who were in the no category, who just voted no on each and everything, and they'll continue to holler that way and gnash teeth and want to express their side of the view. But I think there are enough reasonable people to make that work. What you won't see anymore probably is 39-0 or 38-1 votes. You'll have more of a division within the Senate when it comes to votes.
I've done 2-hour-long podcasts with John, and one of the things we talked about was his approach to how he dealt with governors. And I got to point to this if you just indulge me. John told me that he had always stacked his committees in a manner that gave the members a fair shot, but also made sure that the governor, at the very, very least, had a fighting chance to get his priorities out of committee and onto the floor so the whole body will vote. We saw a shift from that kind of philosophy in the House last term, with completely new leadership across the board. If the legislature wants to stick it to the governor, they can pretty good by stacking those committees in a way that doesn't mirror what John has done for many decades. The governor strategically is probably going to have to go at this a little bit different than he did the first term. And I think he has an opportunity to set a tone with these leadership elections in the House and Senate. And I'm eager to see what that's going to look like.
Representative Smith?
I think that the governor is going to have to work a little bit harder and have people around him who are going to be helpful in helping him to pass what he needs to pass. But I agree with Jeremy that it's going to be how the committees are actually put together, who's going to chair them, what's the influence going to be. When you come in with brand new people, they're so easily influenced on going partisanship. And so I'm hoping that there will be some reasonableness in the House in particular, since there's so many new ones coming in with no background whatsoever on government. And that's the issues that you have, because a lot of them won't be into the reading and the knowing all the bills that have passed prior to what have been the issues. So it is going to be a little more difficult. And I think he's just going to have to work a little harder and be more strategic in how he gets his agenda passed.
But if you have new members and they are more influenceable, I guess I'm wondering, are they going to lean more on the leadership in the House to kind of direct how they should be responding to the governor?
And that's what I mean. That's why he's going to have to work a little harder, because with the House leadership, depending on who the speaker is going to be, who's the speaker pro tem, how that's going to influence members in how they vote. Whatever happened the last 4 years when we looked at the speaker and what happened in that situation, we really found that we became more partisan in the House. And that was because of leadership. So when you look at the Republican leadership and you look at the Democratic leadership in the House, then it's going to depend on how well they're going to be able to influence that agenda that the governor is going to put forth.
Liz?
I think there are probably three things we need to be considering. One is, what does that leadership look like? Is it extreme partisanship, or is it a spirit of cooperation? Could go either way. I mean, we're seeing some in the House and in the Senate, some folks who want to kind of what we have called the party of no for the last 4 years, or is it going to be folks who are saying, let's try to fix the problems that we all perceive are issues in Louisiana. Let's, to Senator Larry's point, what can we agree on? Secondly, I think that the governor has to recognize that he was elected by major population centers, Caddo, East Baton Rouge, Orleans, Jefferson. There are a whole lot of legislators who will be coming in, both new and who have served in the past, who are not from those areas. So he's going to have to figure out how do we come to some agreement on some things. And then thirdly, I think that reapportionment is going to inform everything. I think we're going to see third parties, national third parties coming in and spending some money in Louisiana to affect reapportionment. And so a lot of what Black Caucus members are going to be doing, a lot of what Republicans and others are going to be doing. We're going to probably see some seats go away in North Louisiana. We'll gain some seats in South Louisiana. What does that look like? So I think that's going to inform a lot of what happens in this competition for leadership.
Representative Ivey?
In my opinion, leadership has never mattered more than it will this upcoming term.
In addition to the 43 new members in the House in particular, plus the 10 members who have served 2 years or less, that's 53 members, which is a majority in the House, who have 0 to only 2 years experience. And of course, we do have the most senior freshman ever, Francis Thompson, returning with his wisdom. So that said, we also have had issues with the institution of the legislature with regard to, and particularly in the House, the staff turnover has been high. So the institutional knowledge, and of course with the House, we're losing our clerk, Butch, and the wisdom and the steadfastness that he's brought to members from all political persuasions or ambitions has been vital to the legislature. So we will be redefining, in my opinion, what the legislature is going to look like going forward because of term limits.
Liz, are there specific issues that you see sort of rising to the top of the agenda for legislators in the next term?
Certainly, I think that budget reform, tax reform, there's still discussion on the Constitutional Convention, even though I think that people don't think it's going to become a reality. They're going to explore other ways to get at some of the things they want to try to get at. I think you're looking at continued push on early childhood education. That's something that I think a lot of people can get their heads around and support.
But that seems like an area where maybe the governor and the legislature can find some common ground.
Right. I'm hoping that we sort of start at that point where we can find some common ground to do some things that would move the state forward that we could all agree on.
Representative Ivey, do you think there's any ability to get tax reform accomplished in an upcoming term? I know you've obviously worked on that issue unsuccessfully for...
I may have filed a bill or two.
Or 70.
Yes. So tax reform is obviously one of my major policy focuses. I was very disappointed because we missed a prime opportunity to actually solve a problem. I believe it was Rahm Emanuel who said that never let a good crisis go to waste. And when Governor Edwards took office and we started this term that we're in now, we were in an absolute crisis. And instead of, for the same dollar for dollar providing for structural reforms that would stabilize and help grow our economy organically, we decided to throw some Band-Aids on the problem, and we did it twice. And so the second Band-Aid will be needed to be addressed this term. And so either we will work together, and it must be collaborative. I had a paradigm shift in 2016 because I became frustrated with the process. And what I realized was that in Louisiana, for most of the issues that we face, it requires a 2/3 vote, which means it requires a consensus from Democrats and Republicans. Even if we had a supermajority, the variety of Republicans that we have in the House are so great that it still requires consensus. So either our goal is toward consensus on solving our problems, or the hard partisanship will leave us in a perpetual state of achieving less than we could.
Senator Alario, do you think a constitutional convention is the best way to get at tax reform, or do you see the legislature being able to work on that collaboratively?
Well, the governor spoke against a constitutional convention, if you recall, during the campaign. So I would see his forces trying to not let that happen. I think there's still room to do some fiscal reform, some tax reform. It's ridiculous if you look at Louisiana's, for instance, the corporate rate's at 8%, one of the highest in the nation. When we go out and try to recruit an industry, they're looking at that top rate. They're not looking at all of the exemptions we give at the same time. If somebody will put together the PR that's necessary to say, okay, let's bring that rate down to 4%. Let's cut it in, but take away all exemptions. Now, that's where the problem comes in. Those who are getting those exemptions then begin to holler, wait a minute, I don't want to give up my exemption. And you get most of the hollering comes from the folks who tell you they want tax reform, except if it hits them in the eye. But if we all gave a little bit and brought the tax rate down, we'd all benefit from it because the tax base would be broader. We'd have a much more favorable competition with other states when we're out seeking industries. I think there's an effort that could be made just on the tax reform if folks want to put their heads together and make that happen.
Would that require a special session or something very specific to focus in on that?
It wouldn't
topic?
necessarily require a special session, but generally if you zero in on it, then that would probably make it a little more opportunity where folks are just focused on that and not trading off with other issues.
Representative Smith, you spent 4 years listening to discussions and arguments about taxes. Are you optimistic?
I wish I was.
You look skeptical.
I know, discussions for sure. I think the discussions are definitely going to have to be had. Barry had some very good bills, and it just happened that his own party didn't like his bills. So he and Julie worked hard on a lot of bills that would have brought tax reform in, but I think that there were other agendas that played a role in those bills not even being passed. So to say that you need a constitutional convention to actually look at tax reform, I think is a misnomer, because we actually can do tax reform if it's the will of the legislature to do so. So the discussions have to be had, and we can't have a Ways and Means committee that comes up and just doesn't want to pass bills out of committee. That to me just shows that we're not doing our job. And I think it's important that we really have the discussions and really come up with some kind of compromise. You can't do anything else without a compromise, especially with the number of people that you have in the legislature now.
I want to turn to the audience and see if anybody has any questions for the panel from the audience. Sure.
So you all kind of mentioned how the legislature has become more solidly Republican, and I'm curious, and you also mentioned the variety of Republicans, where that's going to leave moderate Republicans if the relationship between the legislature and the governor were to become a little bit more hostile, which is still potential for becoming true. So I'm just curious where that would leave kind of the variety of Republicans in terms of leadership, committee priorities, their bills.
We have a lot of young, moderate Republicans in the House who are willing to listen. And I think that's very, very important. And many of them are back for their second term. And they will be in some ways the leaders of some of that, speaking across the aisle to get some of the discussions going and possibly looking at passing some reasonable bills.
And so I want to first address the fact that it's not about being a moderate Republican or a conservative Republican, because I consider myself to be a conservative Republican. It's about being objective. Right? We cannot solve problems in a vacuum, right? What we do affects real people. And so Representative Smith and I disagree on many things, but it doesn't mean that I don't try to help solve problems that affect her constituents, and she won't do the same for me. And so to me, we've got to get away from, again, the definition of partisanship is this emotional bias that occurs. The problem, and if you look at the conversations around tax reform and many of the other issues that were so dominant this term, what you'll find is that there's been very little deliberative debate on the actual issue. We didn't discuss the actual policy. It was all about the politics. And what I was most disappointed about last year, that I hope if it does go towards a more consistent partisan leadership style, that the governor missed opportunities to, instead of just trying to negotiate with the hard leadership, there is a large group of members out there who are willing to have the conversations. And so I'm hoping he would pivot toward the more broad membership if negotiations with leadership fails.
Well, I think that's all the time that we have for this panel. Thank you all for attending. I'd like to once again thank everyone who helped make today possible, including the panelists, Louisiana Public Broadcasting, the Manship School, Dean Johnson, the Reilly Center staff, and the director, Dr. Janae Slocum, and all of you in the audience, thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Well, Natasha, what a fascinating conversation. I know you enjoyed being part of it.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to 2020.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to everyone for sharing their analysis of the 2019 elections. Remember to join us live on LPB Monday, January the 13th, as the state swears in Governor John Bel Edwards.
To comment on tonight's show, visit us online at lpb.org/public square. Post your remarks under the Join the Conversation tab. Thanks again for watching, and good night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.